In previous lessons, we learned some of the basic concept of Dart like Dart function, data types, variable, return types, and so on. Now it's time that we move further and understand some of the advanced concept in Dart, and they are objects and classes. So what are objects and classes and how they impact our development in Flutter? Now before we move further, I want you to understand that Dart is an object-oriented programming, and it means that we rely heavily on objects while we code on Dart. So what are objects exactly? Now in Dart, basically everything is an object. In previous lesson we learned about variables, right? So var book name equals to a book. So this is a primitive type of object. We learned about functions. So some function. So this function is also regarded as a first class object in Dart. So these are the primitive types. Not only this var keyword, but boolean, string, integer, double, everything in Dart is a primitive data type or primitive type objects. Now this function is a first class object. But when we talk about objects in Dart, we mainly refer to classes. So when I refer to objects, I basically mean classes and not these variables or functions. These are primitive types, so we'll not be talking about them in the object section. So let's clear that up. And now let's get to the main deal, classes. So what are classes in Dart? So you can directly refer these classes as an objects in Dart. So instead of saying classes, we'll just refer it by objects, right? So for understanding it better, let's take an example of physical world. So everything that you see around you are objects. So a car can be an object, a bike can be an object, a laptop can be an object. So basically everything that exists in physical world is an object. Now these objects have their own properties. Like if you look into this car properties, the car can have a color. Color can be a red color, blue color, green, and so on. And same goes with other objects as well. And these objects can have their own functionalities. Like a car can drive, a bike can drive, a laptop can perform calculations, and so on. So object is something that has properties and that have some functionalities. And the same thing is true with classes or objects in Dart as well. So let's get started by creating a bike object in Dart. So in Dart, for creating a class, you must use the keyword class. So class and then the class name. And the class name starts with an uppercase. So we are creating a class for bike, or we are creating a bike object. So bike. And we do not call parentheses like so in class, but we will have in curly braces. And inside of these brackets will be the methods and properties of the bike. So a class can have properties and methods. So what are properties and methods in class? So if you take an example of a bike, a property of a bike can be the color of bike, right? So let's create a color property. So string color equals to red. This signifies that bike is of red color. Now we can have multiple properties. So number cc equals to this bike is of 155 cc. So it can have red color and it can have cubic capacity or cc of 155. So these are the properties of this bike object. So as you can see, the variables if used inside of the class are the properties of a class, right? So what are methods? So methods are the functionality of this bike. So main functionality of bike is it can take us from one place to another, right? So we can write void ride bike. Now this is the method of bike. There can be multiple methods, but we are talking about only one method for now, and it's called ride bike. And inside of the ride bike, that can be an actual logic of riding a bike, like starting an engine, right? Moving forward, and so on, right? So functions, if used inside of the classes, are called methods. So basically objects in Dart can be defined as the classes that has their own properties and methods. So let me print a statement here. So print bike is moving forward, right? So now let's try calling this ride bike functionalities that is inside of this bike class. So for that we will be needing our entry point. So let me clear this up and void main our entry point, and from inside of this main function we will be accessing this bike object and we will be executing this write back functionality or method of this object. So for accessing this bike object we need to initialize this object first, and this is how you do it. So let's create a variable. So var variable name get bike, and you can initialize or access this bike by using the new keyword. So we are initiating new class of this bike object. So new and then bike and then parenthesis. By doing so, we are creating a new instance of this bike so we can get all the methods and properties of this bike object. Now you can simply access this writeback functionality or writeback method of this object by using getBike, our variable, and then dot writeBike, right? And if I run this code, you can see that our main function has accessed the method of this bike object. So bike is moving forward, which is triggered by this writeback method. Now instead of just writing bike is moving forward, let's say a color, meaning red bike of CC is moving forward. So if I run this now, you can see that red bike of 155cc is moving forward. Now you can also change the properties by accessing the object. For instance, if I want to change the cc of this bike, I can simply write getBike.cc equals to 150, right? Now if I run this code, you can see that red bike of 150cc is moving forward. I can also change the color. So getBike.color equals to blue. Now if I run this code, I can see blue bike of 150cc is moving forward. Now if I want to create another bike, I can simply copy this, paste it, and change like get another bike. Now copy this, change this as well, and then let it be green and of 10cc. And if I click at run, you can see that I have created two instances of this class. It's like creating two different bikes using a same bike and riding it differently, right? This is one of the main advantages of using object-oriented programming, is that you can use, create, destroy objects, and then you can reuse them time and again. So now let's analyze our code and see what's exactly happening here. For that, let me clear this second bike. Now if you look at this first line, you can see that we are creating a new instance of this bike object. Our new bike has been created using the color red and 155cc, and later on we change the color to blue and the cc to 150, and then this writeback function has been triggered, which is showing our updated properties, right? So as you can see, we have only two properties in our bike object, so it is not much of a trouble to change properties in this way. But imagine having hundreds and thousands of properties, and changing property in this manner will be a bit of a hassle, right? So what we can do is, instead of changing color and cc after the bike has been created, we can simply pass this color and cc while creating a bike, so that we do not have to change these properties later in our code. So how can this be done? How can an object be created? By taking values, so that we do not have to change values in the runtime. So this is where the constructor of a class comes into play. So what constructor does in our class is, it takes the values and it will construct the class for us using the predefined values. So we do not have to change the properties time and again. We can pass the properties over here, so that when a class is created, it is created with an updated value. So how can we create constructor? So let's start building a constructor. So now that we will have dynamic values for color and cc, let's remove this. And then simply write string color, because we will be needing the color, and then number cc. So as I have removed this value of color and cc, I am getting an error saying that this field are not initialized yet. And now we need to instruct our Dart code that these values will be given us by the constructor. So let's create a constructor, and constructor always starts with the class name. So class name is bike, so bike, and inside of it will be the values that is expected by the constructor. So color and CC, but instead of writing just color and CC, we need to use this dot keyword in front of this variable so that it can understand that we are trying to assess the variable inside of this class. So this dot color and this dot CC. Now let's close this, and this is how you create a constructor. Now as I have created a constructor, I am getting an error over here saying that a constructor is expecting two variables to be passed, color and CC, but we are not passing any. So let's remove this line, or simply write blue over here being the color and then CC being 65, right? Now we can remove this. Now if I run this code, you can see that my blue bike of 65cc is moving forward. Now I do not need to change the properties once my class or object has been initialized. It's like passing arguments into the function that we learned before, but for the class, right? Now while passing the arguments, to make it easier for us to read, we wrapped these arguments by curly braces, right? So let's wrap this so it will be easier to read. So let's wrap this, and this will be a required field, so required and also required. And then instead of passing variables like this, what we can do is we can provide the color pink and then CC be 290. And this is obviously making our code easier to read, and we can figure out what type of arguments are being passed while the class is being constructed, right? Now if I run this, I can see the updated results of pink bike of 290cc is moving forward. So this is how you work with objects and classes in Dart. Now in the next lesson, we will be learning about extending a class, which is very important concept for Flutter app development. So I'll see you at the next lesson.